guy hasn't paid us since July, but with COVID going on, we couldn't evict him, so we've had nothing but problems with him. Anyways, we finally got him to move out, so I've seen him today. We haven't come by, we haven't messed with him. We're afraid of kick his ass, you know. When I came by, he says, I'm gonna leave you a pile to throw. Well, we didn't know which pile, so we started to load it up. While we were moving some things, and we found this puppy in his box underneath some of the kid stuff, you know.
Okay.
So we go to put the puppy in the bag because we were going to bury it, and then we see that they had tied a cord on its neck.
Okay.
Well, we've had, like I said, nothing but problems with these guys, so I at least want to put a report on file. I know we won't be able to say who did it and when, but that needs to be associated with him, you know, because we're going to take him to court for a lot of other things, and if I can just have that on file, it'll help.
Okay. Remember the last time you saw him? Maybe a couple of months ago.
Police get hundreds of calls every week. Some turn out to be nothing, others change everything. At first, this was supposed to be routine. Just an abandoned truck in an airport parking lot. Officers thought it might be a stolen vehicle, maybe a drunk who forgot where they parked. But as they got closer, one officer stopped, tilted his head, and said quietly, "Do you smell that?" A strange, metallic odor seeped from the vehicle. When they pried open the back, what they saw left them speechless. Inside the boxes were bodies. Not just murdered, dismembered. For victims, brutally cut apart and hidden like garbage. But here's the twist. Investigators had no idea this was just the beginning. Because buried in remote corners of the state, 11 more victims were waiting to be found. 15 lives stolen, and a killer still free. The chase had just begun. Now, you might think police instantly knew who they were hunting. They didn't. At first, the trail looked almost random. A missing man here, a concerned grandmother there. It began like an ordinary Sunday in Grants, New Mexico. A quiet town where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. But that day, a landlord phoned the police with what sounded like a routine complaint. An evicted tenant had left behind boxes of belongings, trash, and a terrible mess. But in the middle of it all, something disturbing was found. A small puppy, dead inside a cardboard box, its neck tightly bound with a cord. At first glance, it looked like cruelty toward an animal, which was bad enough. But the officers on scene felt something deeper, something off. Why would a man abandon his home, leave behind strange belongings, and cruelly kill a puppy? What they didn't know was that this single call would be the first thread in a horrifying unraveling. One that would expose a chain of murders stretching across the state, and a killer who had been walking among them all along. At first, police treated the case as an act of animal abuse. The dead puppy was heartbreaking, and neighbors were shaken, but no one was prepared for what came next. That same week, officers received another call, this time from a grandmother who reported her grandson missing. His name was Matthew Miller, a 19-year-old boy who had battled his share of struggles with drugs, but who had always come back home when things got rough. His grandmother insisted something was wrong this time. He had vanished without a word. No phone calls, no signs of life, nothing. Detectives began to dig into Matthew's last known whereabouts, and it was then that a troubling connection surfaced. Matthew had been seen with a woman named Jennifer Lannon, and shortly after, two more names came into play, Justin Ma and his girlfriend, Leonie Cazada. Within days, 3 young people, all connected, had seemingly disappeared off the face of the earth. The first real break came when investigators found Matthew's Chevy Colorado truck abandoned in a strange location near Justin's home. The vehicle immediately raised suspicion. Inside, they discovered personal belongings scattered across the seats, including rubber gloves, and several smashed cell phones. It was a scene that did not look like a teenager running away. It looked like someone had tried to erase something to cover their tracks in a hurry. Even stranger, surveillance cameras from around the neighborhood showed Mhovel. Andithu's truck parked outside Jennifer and Sean Lannon's residence only days before he disappeared. But there was no footage of Matthew ever leaving that house alive. Detectives knew then they were not dealing with a missing persons case anymore. They were staring at a crime that was beginning to take the shape of something much darker. Detective Robert Turney, one of the lead investigators, decided to pursue the fragile trail. He started with Leonie, Justin's girlfriend, hoping for answers. But her responses only deepened the mystery. She claimed she hadn't seen Matthew in over a year. Even though the cameras told a different story, she denied knowing anything, her eyes shifting, her voice hesitant. For Turney, the contradictions were a red flag. The circle of missing people was tightening around one man's orbit, a man whose name kept coming up again and again, Sean Lannon. He was Jennifer's estranged husband, the same tenant who had left behind the dead puppy. His name was no longer just another on the witness list. It was the center of a widening storm. As detectives studied Sean more closely, the pieces began to fall into place. Security cameras outside his residence revealed damning details. On January 26th, footage showed Matthew entering Sean's home. Hours later, Sean drove away in Matthew's truck, alone. 2 days later, neighbors' cameras captured Sean and another individual loading household items into a red Dodge Dakota. But Matthew was never seen again. Investigators now had their first true timeline of events. Matthew entered Sean's home alive. He never came out. From that moment, suspicion turned into near certainty. Sean Lannon had killed Matthew, and possibly the others as well. But proof was still scarce, and without a confession or a body, all detectives had were troubling connections and mounting dread. When detectives finally sat Sean down in an interrogation room, what struck them most wasn't what he said, but how he acted. While discussing the disappearance of his wife, Jennifer, and the others tied to the case, Sean remained calm, eerily calm. There was no visible panic, no anger, no fear. He leaned back in his chair, spoke evenly, and gave carefully measured answers, almost like a man reading from a script. Detective Turney would later recall that it was as if Sean had rehearsed this moment, as if he had prepared himself for these questions. Then, at the end of the interview, came something chilling. Sean smiled. Just a small smile, but enough to send a shiver through the room. It was a smile that suggested he knew something no one else did. A smile that hinted at hidden truths still buried in silence. The silence cracked when a man named Josh Hall came forward. Josh, an acquaintance of Sean, called police with an alarming story. He claimed Sean had hidden a bag in someone's ceiling before going to the station for questioning. Inside, Josh said, was evidence, items Sean didn't want police to find. Detectives moved quickly, and when they recovered the bag, their worst fears were confirmed. Inside were clothes, IDs, and, most damning of all, a gun. Josh didn't mince words. Sean killed all 3 of them, he told police. He's putting it off like they ran away, but I know he did it. For the first time, detectives had tangible evidence pointing to Sean as more than just a suspicious figure. They had a weapon, a witness, and a clearer picture of a man desperately covering his tracks. But the trail didn't stop there. The bag had been hidden in the home of a woman named Kelly Dotto. When detectives approached her, she was hesitant, cagey, and quick to mention her lawyer. She admitted Sean had been at her house, that he had smashed his phone there, and that he had asked about the missing bag. She admitted he had been behaving strangely, paranoid, looking over his shoulder. It was clear Sean trusted Kelly enough to use her home as a hiding spot, but it was also clear she was terrified of what he had dragged her into. Detectives pressed, and with each detail, the picture of Sean as a cold, calculating man only sharpened. He was not panicking. He was not sloppy. He was careful, measured, and always one step ahead. By now, the case had grown from a missing persons investigation to a hunt for a suspected serial killer. And as detectives dug deeper, they began to realize that this wasn't just about Matthew, Jennifer, and Justin. There were other disappearances, other bodies, and a pattern that suggested Sean's violence stretched further back than anyone had realized. Grants, New Mexico, a town of less than 10,000 people, suddenly found itself at the center of one of the most chilling crime sprees in state history. The discovery of multiple bodies, some hidden in vehicles, others buried, forced residents to confront a terrifying truth. The man they had seen buying groceries, walking down the street, waving politely, had been killing in their midst all along. The courtroom later revealed the full scale of Sean's crimes. Prosecutors laid out the evidence piece by piece. The surveillance footage, the abandoned truck, the smashed phones, the gloves, the shovel, the bag in Kelly's ceiling, and the testimonies of those who knew him. It became clear that these were not random acts of rage. They were calculated, systematic, carried out with chilling precision. Sean Lannon had crafted a web of manipulation and violence that ensnared everyone close to him. And as more evidence emerged, it became impossible to see him as anything other than what he was, a predator hiding in plain sight. The calm smile in that interrogation room made sense now. It was the smile of a man who thought he had beaten the system. For the families of the victims, the revelations were shattering. Matthew's grandmother, who had been the first to raise alarm, sat through hearings clutching photographs of her grandson. Jennifer's relatives wept as they heard the details of how her estranged husband had taken her life. Justin's family demanded answers, struggling to understand how a trusted friend could turn into a killer. Each piece of evidence was a dagger to their hearts, a reminder of the brutal final moments their loved ones endured. In their grief, one question echoed louder than any other. How had this been allowed to go so far before anyone stopped him? The legal process was slow, but relentless. In New Mexico, the death penalty had been abolished in 2009, but prosecutors pushed for the harshest punishment possible: life without parole. In New Jersey, where Sean also faced charges, the possibility of capital punishment was raised, though ultimately not pursued. In the end, Sean Lannon pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, his freedom stripped, his calm smile finally gone. For the community of Grants, it was some measure of justice, but it could never replace what was lost. The empty seats at dinner tables, the birthdays never celebrated, the families broken forever. Those wounds would never fully heal. As the years passed, one detail continued to haunt detectives and families alike: that first call about the dead puppy. It seemed small at the time, just another act of cruelty in a world that had seen too much of it. But in hindsight, it was the warning sign, the clue that could have changed everything if only it had been recognized for what it was. That puppy was not just an act of senseless violence. It was the first life taken in a string of murders. The first victim in a spree that would eventually claim far more. Sometimes evil announces itself quietly, with a whimper instead of a scream. And sometimes, by the time anyone listens, it's already too late. Looking back, the Sean Lannon case is a chilling study of how darkness can hide in the everyday. A man who was a father, a husband, a neighbor, and a friend was also a killer. He blended in so well that no one suspected him until it was far too late. The evidence was always there. Smashed phones, sudden disappearances, the calm demeanor of a man with too much to hide. But until all the pieces were laid together, no one could see the full picture. And when the picture was finally revealed, it showed something too monstrous to believe. That is the true horror of this case. Not just the killings themselves, but the realization that a predator can walk among us, unnoticed, for far too long. Today, Sean Lannon sits behind bars, his life reduced to a cell, his legacy one of destruction and horror. He will likely die in prison, his name remembered only as a cautionary tale. For the families, justice was partial, never complete, but enough to ensure he could never hurt anyone again. For detectives like Robert Turney, the case remains one of the darkest of their careers, a reminder of the fine line between routine police work and uncovering a nightmare. And for the community of Grants, it is a scar that will never fully fade. A reminder that sometimes the monster does not wear a mask. Sometimes the monster is the man next door. What began as a simple call about an abandoned house ended in the exposure of a killer. From a dead puppy in a box to 4 bodies hidden in a truck, to a string of disappearances that shocked an entire town, the story of Sean Lannon is one of the most haunting in modern true crime. It is a story of missed signs, of families broken, of detectives piecing together fragments of horror until the truth could no longer be denied. And it is a story that forces us all to confront an uncomfortable reality. Evil rarely announces itself loudly. More often, it hides in plain sight, smiling calmly in an interrogation room, waiting for the moment when its secrets finally spill into the light.
Kind of smells. Kind of smells, but I mean, not to like decompose or anything. You know what I mean?
I got you guys out here, huh?
Yeah.
We called it in 1:30, but they said they didn't want to send anybody out here.
There's a pretty foul smell coming from the vehicle.
Yeah.
Every so often, I don't know if you noticed.
Yeah, I can't really tell what it was. It didn't really sound like. I can't really think it smelled like decomp body or something like that, but I don't know. But yeah, I can smell something, but I can't tell what it was. It also smelled like dirty, big deal almost, but yeah, I don't know. But we'll check the video and all that good stuff, so.
I didn't know anybody. What do you do with the body? So I was trying to. I knew at some point it was going to get caught. I just want my kids back home. I took them to the airport the day before. And I positioned them. Just everything was the same. Secured the vehicle. That's not obvious. And then took I believe it was an Uber. Took it home. Right to the Pearl. The next day we flew out. I'm waiting on time. Again. At some point they'd find the bodies at the airport in the box. And last thing on my list was the man that was me as a child, my big brother. My big brother's big sisters or whatever. They got pictures too. He wanted the pictures back. He didn't want to give me the pictures, so I started beating him. He didn't give me the pictures. It took his life. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of it. I did fly in town. I'll make it back to finish.